A friend of mine who works at a big city hospital told me this story. I won't say which hospital, it's the only one in the area, and he doesn't need people thinking he's lost his mind. He's an orderly. Long shifts, 24 hours on, 3 days off. During the day, he moves patients between surgeries, x-rays, and procedures. At night, he collects the dead. They place them in black plastic bags and wheel them to the morgue. It used to be done through an underground tunnel, but it flooded last year. The structure was deemed unsafe, so now they use the streets. People die at all hours, but most seem to go at night. Some shifts, he says, there are as many as 10. Handling warm bodies is the worst. They feel too human. If fluids leak or if the jaw opens, it's worse. Once the body stiffens, it becomes easier, like moving furniture. You flip, bag, zip, done. By morning, a city transport truck arrives. Sometimes they stack the bodies in layers. He and the drivers load the bags, then silence until the next call. One night, his partner got sick and left early. The shift had been quiet. Around 2:30 a.m., he brought in an old woman. She was light as foam. He placed her in the refrigerated room and turned to leave. Then he stopped. There were 5 body bags. He did the math again. 4 people had died that day. 4, not 5. He approached the extra bag. Each one has a tag: name, ward, time of death. This one had scribbles, jagged handwriting, like someone had been shaking. Nothing was readable. He reached for the zipper, then the bag twitched. He ran. Behind him, the door slammed shut. A second later, a loud, wet thud. Something heavy had fallen off the metal table. Panicking, he ran to the boarded-up passage. One of the wooden planks had come loose. Without thinking, he tore it away and squeezed through. No lights, no sound, only the soft thumps of his own shoes and the smell of rot. He turned on his phone's flashlight. The tunnel was wrong, not the tiled corridor he knew. This one was arched, built of old stone, slick with mold. The floor was cracked, and weeds grew through the seams, and both sides were lined with black body bags, dozens of them, each with the same trembling handwriting on the tag. He felt drawn to one of them. He knelt and unzipped it halfway. A brown, jelly-like fluid oozed out. No smell. Inside, something human-shaped, but wrong, unfinished, like a mannequin. No features, just flesh. Then its eyelid twitched. He zipped it shut and bolted. Back in the morgue, the fallen bag was lying in the doorway. He turned to run again, but froze at the sound of voices outside. 2 men, one was angry, the other apologetic. He hid in a janitor's closet. Through the cracked door, he saw them drag the bag out and heave it into a vehicle. The suspension creaked under the weight. Then they tried to enter the tunnel. One pounded on the boards, cursed. A moment later, the sound of a car door. Then the engine started, and silence. No one else died that night. No one noticed he'd been gone. At sunrise, he returned to the morgue with security, pretending to check the locks. The freezer was colder than usual. The bags were all accounted for. 4, just like before. The guards confirmed no vehicles had entered the premises. The transport truck wasn't due for another hour. Later, he checked the tunnel again. The boards were sealed tight. The passage was dry, empty, clean. But now, every time he walks into the morgue, he counts the body bags, and he never ever looks toward the passageway. Jake never believed in stories about the dead coming back to life. Silly tales for teenagers, nothing more. But when a mutated strain of COVID-19 swept through the town, everything changed. At first, it seemed like just another wave of the virus. Fever, weakness, coughing. But soon people started acting strangely. First came the blank, lifeless stares, then the eerie, unnatural movements. The hospitals were overwhelmed, then silent. Soon people simply vanished. One evening, Jake was sitting at home when suddenly there was a knock on the door. It was already dark outside, and visiting someone at such an hour was unusual for his neighbors. Jake peeked through the peephole. His neighbor Sarah stood there. She looked pale, her eyes wide open, but there was something terribly wrong with her. He hesitated, then opened the door. "Sarah, what happened?" She stumbled into the apartment, knocking him off his feet. A guttural groan escaped her lips. There was dried blood on her face, her eyes empty, as if no soul remained inside. Jake didn't have time to scream before she grabbed his shoulder. Pain shot through his body. He barely managed to push her off and backed away, frantically looking for a weapon. Sarah slowly rose, her mouth smeared with blood. Then he realized she was no longer human. This thing wanted to tear him apart. With trembling hands, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen table. A second of hesitation, and he plunged the blade into her chest. She didn't stop, didn't even flinch, only tilted her head, letting out a deep growl. Jake sprinted to the door, slamming it shut just in time. She pounded against it furiously while he gasped for air, his hands fumbling to lock every possible latch. But then he heard more footsteps. Not one, not two, but dozens. Voices outside turned into a chorus of moans. He slowly approached the window and looked out. The street was filled with them. People with dead eyes wandered everywhere. Some crawled, others had broken limbs, but it didn't stop them. They reached out, heading toward the houses, searching for new victims. His phone. He grabbed his mobile, but the network was down. No internet, no connection, no hope. Jake was alone in this nightmare. A loud bang at the door. The wood cracked. The lock wouldn't hold much longer. He rushed to the closet, grabbed a thick jacket, boots, and tried to think of anything that could be used as a weapon. Only one thing came to mind: the baseball bat in his garage. But how could he get there? More cracking sounds. They were breaking in. Jake took a deep breath, opened the window, and looked down. Second floor. High, but better than being torn apart. He climbed onto the ledge, ignoring the risks, then jumped. Pain shot through his leg, but he rolled on the ground and immediately got up. Inside the house, there were clattering and shuffling noises. They were already in. He ran. The dark streets no longer seemed empty. Shadows flickered in every window. Footsteps echoed from every alley. The town was doomed. Reaching the garage, he quickly unlocked the door, grabbed the bat, and scanned the shelves. A gas canister. A thought flashed in his mind. If I can't kill them, I'll burn them. But would he survive? The curse of the abandoned subway. Urban legends are always shrouded in mystery, but some are too terrifying to be just myths. In a major metropolis, there exists an old subway tunnel that was shut down years ago. The official story? Structural failures, unstable ground. But the locals whisper a different tale. They hear strange sounds coming from the darkness, echoing footsteps, muffled screams, even eerie laughter. A few brave souls have tried to enter, but none have ever returned. One such person was Nathan, a blogger fascinated by abandoned places. He was convinced that the stories were nothing but rumors, so he set out to uncover the truth. Equipped with a flashlight and a camera, he slipped into the tunnel through a forgotten emergency exit. At first, everything seemed normal: dusty tracks, rusted signs, crumbling walls. But the further he ventured, the stronger the feeling grew that he was not alone. At the 200-meter mark, he heard shuffling behind him. Turning around, he saw nothing but darkness. However, his camera, set to night vision, captured something else. A tall, emaciated figure stood just a few steps behind him, its eyes hollow, limbs unnaturally elongated. Its mouth hung open, yet no sound came out. Panic surged through Nathan as he bolted back the way he came. But the tunnel was no longer as he remembered. The tracks had vanished, the walls had turned damp, covered in what looked like decaying flesh. His camera picked up something even more horrifying: shadows emerging around him, twisted silhouettes of people, their arms reaching out. Their faces were contorted in eternal agony, their screams unheard. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered. In its final flickers, he saw a face, pale, eyeless, its mouth stretched wide. The creature emitted a guttural rasp, and then darkness. A breath, right next to his ear. Nathan staggered back, but something grabbed his ankle, wet, ice cold, like a drowning corpse's hand. He screamed, but the shadows only pressed closer. As he thrashed, his camera fell, landing with a sickening crunch. The dim red light of its recording function was the only illumination left. In its glow, Nathan saw the figures more clearly. They were not just shadows. They were bodies, rotting, flesh merging with the tunnel walls, their eyes empty, mouths locked in silent screams. Their fingers, gnarled and broken, clawed at him, pulling him deeper. A voice, deep and layered, reverberated through the tunnel. "Join us." Nathan tried to resist, but his body was sinking, his limbs fusing with the floor. His skin cracked like old leather as something beneath it began to writhe. He gasped, but no sound came out. His breath was stolen, his thoughts faded, his consciousness stretched thin until only one thing remained: hunger. Weeks later, workers made a horrifying discovery. Deep in the tunnel, among the rusted tracks, lay a mutilated body fused to the rails. Its eyes were hollow sockets filled with writhing roots, its flesh entwined with the pulsating ground. Strange symbols were scratched into the walls around it, symbols that no one could decipher, but all instinctively feared. Above the corpse, scratched deep into the stone, were the words, "He never left, he waits." Since then, passers-by hear footsteps and muffled screams, and the most observant notice that the tracks are slowly being overtaken by dark, creeping vines. Vines that seem to pulse, as if they are breathing.